What is it that we talk about when we talk about tax reform? Is everybody operating on the assumption here that House Speaker Paul Ryan's plan is going to be the groundwork on which tax reform is built?
David, I think the key thing that people think of when they think of tax reform is a series of reductions to tax rates, both individual side and the corporate side, offset by closing loopholes, tax deductions and tax loopholes to cover the cost. The key thing to know is when we talk tax reform, that the operating theory is that it's going to be revenue neutral. In other words, all the rate cuts that produce losses to the government will be paid for by loopholes and deductions that are closed that essentially offset that. And the reason for that is important. It's that in the Senate, there's a 60-vote threshold that can only be bypassed if you essentially make it revenue neutral and make sure it doesn't add to the deficit. And Republicans have 52 votes in the Senate. Not a lot of hope of winning Democrats.
All right, let's get into this battle royale here, potential battle royale between banks and insurers and private equity here. You're focusing on one specific facet of House Speaker Paul Ryan's plan. This has to do with interest charged on loans. Give us a sense of what's at stake here and how this got into the legislation.
David, this is another interesting battle, a very important battle in tax reform, and the whole point of this is, to find revenues. Republicans need to find revenues everywhere they possibly can in the tax code, because these rate cuts that they're looking at on the individual and corporate side are going to cost trillions of dollars. This particular proposal would essentially equalize the treatment of the tax treatment of debt and equity, and as you mentioned, it pits financial services firms against private equity. Financial services firms would benefit from this, and private equity sort of has this existing provision in the law as some leverage that they would lose. So this is another battle that has yet to play out. Remember, there's no legislation yet. There's a series of ideas. There's a blueprint, and House Speaker Paul Ryan's blueprint is the basis of everything that's being discussed right now.
How much of this is about incentivizing CapEx? In other words, you put this into the proposal, perhaps you put it into the plan itself, into the legislation, and what that does is incentivizes companies to spend money on plants and equipment.
You know, I'm not sure that's exactly what they're going for here. I think they look at this and they see this as a potential benefit. This is a perk that one set of people get, and they're trying to close that. The whole idea that Kevin Brady and the House Ways and Means Committee and Speaker Ryan keep talking about is to simplify things, to make things fair, to make the code flatter, and to remove special perks or things seen as special perks that some people get and others don't. So there will be a cost to these things. None of these things come without a cost. Anything this big and bold and ambitious is going to have winners and losers. And that's why this whole effort is going to be so difficult.
So you and your colleagues are shedding light here on this part of the plan. Have we heard from banks? Have we heard from insurers? How concerned are they about this getting into the final piece of legislation?
Well, right now, most of the lobbying is happening behind the scenes. We're seeing a flurry of lobbying from retailers against this border adjustment tax, which really sits at the heart of the Ryan and Brady plan. We're talking about $1 trillion in added revenue by essentially imposing higher taxes on imported goods that companies will have to pay. Theoretically, they'll pass them on to consumers, is what they're saying. So most of the lobbying is happening behind the scenes. These industry groups tend to prefer to speak directly with these lawmakers on obscure provisions like this. But on the border adjustment tax, unlike this other investment proposal that people are looking at, on the border adjustment tax, retailers are really hammering home their assertions that this would hit consumers pretty hard. So there's a public and a private element to it.
Very quickly here, how does this interface with what Gary Cohn is working on in the White House, the chair of the National Economic Council, working on a tax reform plan of his own? How are they going to dovetail?
Well, at this point, we don't know a ton about what President Trump is going to say. He said he's going to address it tomorrow in his joint speech to Congress. And Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin gave us a little bit of a preview of it. The president is still undecided on the border adjustment tax. He's talked about some sort of a repatriation scheme to encourage companies to come back, companies that park their money abroad to come back home. But beyond that, it remains a mystery, and nobody on Capitol Hill is really talking, because this president is a very difficult one to predict.